host Effie Pilarino, and I have the pleasure today to have with me Thierry Bouchler, who is the head of innovation, strategy, and operations at Oracle. He's based in Switzerland, but covers Europe and the Middle East. Welcome, Thierry.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Effie.
Thierry, I know that you have a very quantitative background in computer science, artificial intelligence. You've studied here in Switzerland at ETH, and your perspective is very different and valuable because from reading one of your blogs, I know that you're very much interested in that convergence between machines and humans, how teams work. I understand with your innovation work at Oracle, you're continuously co-innovating, co-creating with clients. So we have a lot to talk about. So let me start with, a theme that is obviously hot on everybody's mind more than ever before, which is all about transformation in organizations, whether it's to increase efficiencies, to adopt new technologies. In one of your recent articles, you stressed rather the point that transformation is not sort of an end state. It's not like an equilibrium that we should aim to reach to. Tell us about that, what it means in practice for companies today.
Yes, so my team works with clients, with Oracle's customers to solve the digital transformation and more generic innovation challenges that the companies face, both on an operational, but then of course also technical level. However, the first question we ask our customers is always, what is your business need that we're trying to tackle here? Everything we do is based around framing the challenge and then executing on it. The advantage is that with the Oracle cloud portfolio that we offer, we can tackle most technical problems with limited effort. So we can actually, in the dialogue with those clients, focus on the non-technical aspects of eventually landing this, of executing this, which is often just as hard, if not harder. For example, in Switzerland, we've been working with companies like SGS to support them throughout their transformation journey. Swiss Post Solutions have integrated sales, marketing, social, all on Oracle Cloud, which is great. But for both, that journey keeps on continuing, right? It's, as you said, it's fluid, it moves, it's not an end state. Why we want to take a lot of guessing out of this innovation process, or continuing with them, we're very data-driven after all. So we measure things, we take data sets, we apply algorithms, we find patterns. However, at the core of everything are human needs to actually create an innovation that will be utilized. And those needs, they keep on changing. Humans keep on changing. And then you have events like we have just now that nobody really saw coming. So we have to revisit the frame of reference from time to time, even if data-driven, to tackle this fluidity. And it just keeps on continuing, and you want to get better at it.
Interesting, very interesting. You mentioned the current, the recent rather disruption that, of course, continues, maybe not at the same sort of intensity, but it definitely keeps business continuity on the top of the agenda of any decision maker. And as I mentioned earlier to you before we went live, I've been discussing with C-suite executives about business continuity and technology. What is their relationship, and especially within the context of COVID-19, and how the human needs are core to all of this. So the question is, how do you see it on the work that you do in the field, really the human needs and this relationship between technology and decision makers?
Yes, so at first sight, the two of them are not very much related, right? When you talk about technology, you think about processes and automation and how to write stuff down and make it happen automatically without actually having too many humans in the process. However, let's face it, how many processes that you perhaps have in your organization do you actually follow according to the book, according to the way they were designed, right? So that's a very obvious part where humans come into play, and we have to think about, A, will people use the technology in the way it was intended? And B, how will they perhaps apply human hacks or change the way they apply it? The other thing that I believe, or we believe as a team, are very important. If you want to look at transformation, you need to understand the life cycle, the journey that people are in, and the moments that matter to them most, especially if you look at B2C or B2B customer interactions, because they are fulfilling needs of a certain kind. And engagements with those customers, so our customers, is where you can actually deliver to meet those needs. Today, a lot of businesses are so focused on the word experience or customer experience that they forget to a certain extent how important it is to understand what they cannot control, like the perceptions of that human. And every experience that we have shapes our expectation of the future, right? So expectations are sometimes not realistic. From research, we know that people are not always behaving rationally, but they're still real and they must be taken into consideration. So that is the customer side that we spend quite some time in to see how technology will eventually add real value. And at the end of the day, what organizations can control are the activities and propositions that their brand executes at that moment that matters, that I mentioned before, right? And all of this must be aligned to meet the needs of the customer and hence deliver that value that can be monetized at the end of the day.
Great. Yeah, you addressed a very important issue about the irrationality and accepting our nature being irrational. And then on the other hand, having all these technological processes and business processes that are designed in a very rational way and how to do that. I'd like to ask you your view about what would you suggest for Swiss companies specifically with, the tradition here, the culture here. They are faced with the predicament to adapt and transform at a much faster pace than they would have ever liked. So what do you suggest? What would you advise to these companies now after this sort of big, some call it black swan, maybe it wasn't a black swan, but definitely not something that was in the scenario analysis of most companies?
Yeah, so traditionally, Swiss mentality, you see that in politics, you see that in economics, you see that in the private and the public sectors, was quite deliberate when it came to change, right? Swiss organizations and people tend not to rush and to front load. And I think this is, even in an accelerated world, this is something we should continue doing, right? Don't rush to try to accelerate too much, because the hard part when you go the next step and prepare for the next normal will be implementation. So if you don't frame your problem well enough, like we tend to do it, by expediting all the time and actually rushing, you will eventually be much slower, because many open questions need to be answered late in the process, or while people would actually like to build something rather than go back and think about the problem itself. In the worst case, these ideas that came up initially are totally ignored, and a service is built which is not actually doing what was intended. So this goes back to the human needs we mentioned before. And I think Swiss organizations, to a certain extent, should just stay true to their values. Think about the problem, lean back, even if it's shorter than maybe we used to move in the past, but still do it. And then think about what are the key things that we need to tackle? How can we frame this? And then implement it much faster than some others might be able to do it. And I think if you have a good partner at hand that can support you with that and already has a large portfolio to offer out of the box, that will help a lot in expediting even more.
Thank you, Jerry. I have to touch on the big and broad topic of data. We talk about data all the time, and obviously there are silos everywhere, data silos in every organization. Talking to decision makers, what I have come to realize that maybe certain data silos need to remain, but definitely we are looking at reducing the number of data silos within organizations, and especially complex organizations. So what is your recommendation specifically around data silos of different, of course, nature?
So, coming from Oracle, at one point, we always deal with data. So we've been doing it over many years, and we've been doing it in different settings. So data is a thing that comes up all the time. I believe when it comes to breaking those silos, you basically move on two levels again. The first level is the human or organizational level, and I'll tell you what I mean in a second. And the second one is the data level itself, the technology that treats this data. And when I, heard about the topic that we're going to discuss today, I looked at a recent study that Forrester, commissioned by Oracle, just released recently, and it's actually, evident. 82% of senior technology decision makers recognize what you just said, right? Investing in the right data management strategy will lead to better outcomes on the business side, and moving beyond silos. However, 3/4, or 73% to be precise, without mentioning too many numbers, admit that they have those disparate data strategies across the organization, and this is stopping them from providing those business stakeholders with the data they need at the time they need. And this is something that in many of the engagements, even with fancy titles around artificial intelligence and machine learning, etc., we've been tackling as a very base problem since many years. And then usually they need this data right now, right? So people come up with a new idea, they need data, so they don't have time for a long IT project to set this up. And what also happens more and more is that this needs to happen in a so-called multi-hybrid cloud environment. So companies are shifting to the cloud, they work with several offerings, and they need to bring things together. Oracle, for example, has started a large collaboration partnership with Microsoft recently to enable that. And again, the study, just to throw yet another number at the audience and at you, shows that 64% of all the respondents are grappling with the challenge of a multi-hybrid infrastructure. So this is already a problem today. It's not something that is only starting to happen. And in addition to the technology that helps solve this, like a multi-layer cloud at Oracle, the multi-layered human levels, again, are playing a role. So I'm coming back to my first point. Sharing that data across these environments, even in the same organization, is not always trivial. In fact, the human factor might be much harder to tackle than the underlying technology, right? I've observed this in countless engagements. And if you want to be both sustainable and harmonious in the way you do that, you need to get the human level right just as well as you get the technology right.
Which brings back to our initial conversation about transformation being a continuous fluid journey. It seems to me that what you're saying, even for if you have a data management roadmap, it has to also be a continuous, fluid, dynamic roadmap that is not going to end let's say 6 or 18 months. It has to be adapted mainly because of the human factor, of course, taking into account the data produced. You agree?
I do agree. You know, at the moment, during the current crisis, everybody wants stuff now and they're in shock and they have to figure out how to get out of it. But we do try, again, in a Swiss mentality, in the framing, we do try to have a dialogue with people. Let's fix this now, but let's do have an outlook at what this will mean for the future of your business.
So have you seen a real shift in the mindset around breaking the silos, be it at the data level or at the human level between departments and so on, during this huge, large-scale, forced experimentation that we were all thrown at?
Yes, I've faced it. Again, specifically in Switzerland, across our large industries, I've seen it in banking, I've seen it in pharma, I've seen it even in retail and large manufacturing industries. The shock, to a certain extent, helped people rethink at least the human level. The technology level was really a question of maturity, right? Did organizations, again, both public and private sector, have the right preparation to do that, or was that something they had to spin up quickly? Now, if they were cloud ready, it was easier for them to spin up solutions than it was if you have to order a large server farm or something like that and wait for that to first arrive. But the mindset that is required for this has indeed changed during the crisis in the last couple of weeks or even months. Now, one thing that is important when you think about that is that you always keep in mind key topics like security or resilience that will just not change with a crisis, right? And if you have a cloud that is already pre-integrated or works well, between clouds, like we do at Oracle, then you have integrated security. It's actually architected into the solution and across the products. And this is something that you need to keep in mind. Security is one of the two big hard topics if you need to change quickly. The other one is integration. And that's also something that is harder to do with a lot of small point innovations. So you want to have a bigger picture there. Again, the ones who were prepared for this were better at tackling it, and others had to pay a slightly higher price.
Thank you, Terry. What I heard from you is that Swiss companies should focus on built-in attributes in the technology that they're using instead of piling all add-ons that are very difficult to integrate and have a cohesive and sustainable process or processes to support them. So I want to close and thank you for sharing your insights and circle back to what initially we said about technology and the human experience. And I hope that from what you shared with us, that relationship will be improving. There will be more focus on that, and technology will not just be about implementing a code, integrating into a certain technology, or be it hardware or software, and that we will have much more focus on the human aspect of it and how it takes a life of its own within teams, internally in organizations, and with their customers across the value chain. I'd like to hear from you just two closing words, your last advice going forward as we move to a more normal, but a new normal here in Switzerland and globally.
I think if you're open to work with partners and to innovate jointly together, and make sure you build this on a fundament of resilience and security and all the other base things that you need as an organization. You will always be more successful during the crisis, but also afterwards, than if you have a self-built setup, both on the human and technical level, specific to only your organization, where you defend the old silos that have been around for decades. And I hope that I can, collaborate with a lot of listeners going forward to make this happen.
I hear from you, Thierry, that you are suggesting openness, yet a structure and an architecture that is resilient and secure, but openness. And I wish that you can convey this idea and this narrative instead of one that is closed, proprietary, and not resilient and secure in a world that everything becomes an ecosystem and a platform. We are all hyper connected. Thank you very much, Thierry.
Thank you very much, Efi.